The chamber of the Galactic Council had never been this quiet before. The ceiling was made of black glass that reflected the starlight of 1,000 systems. Massive golden pillars lined the circular hall, each etched with the crest of a member species. From orbit, the station glittered like a crown floating above the council homeworld. But inside, the air was heavy. Every delegate sat at their long, curved tables, their voices muted, their hands still. It wasn't because they didn't know what was happening. It was because they did, and that made it worse. At the center of the chamber stood the Speaker of the Council, an old being with 4 silver horns and trembling hands. He raised his voice through the amplifiers, his words echoing across the galaxy on every diplomatic frequency. Today, he began slowly. We make a stand against the Terran species. Today, the Council declares war on humanity. His voice cracked slightly, and though the declaration was meant to sound powerful, the silence that followed made it sound like a death sentence. No one clapped. No one roared in agreement. A few delegates exchanged nervous glances. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. It wasn't because they liked humans. Most of them didn't. Humans were a problem. They were loud, stubborn, emotional, and far too clever for their own good. They didn't have the biggest fleets or the oldest civilizations, but they had something else. Something that made even the most warlike species hesitate before crossing them. It wasn't strength. It was the way humans fought. They didn't follow the clean, predictable rules of war the galaxy liked. When humans fought, they fought to end wars completely. The speaker tried to sound confident as he continued. The Terrans have refused trade oversight, rejected council authority, and built fleets outside the Accord. Their expansion is dangerous. Their technology is unpredictable. They are, he paused when his voice caught. Even he couldn't fully believe what he was saying. A threat to galactic order. A delegate from the Zori Confederation raised a hand. His species had been fighting wars long before humans ever left their planet. His voice, though soft, carried the weight of old scars. "Speaker," he said, "are we sure this is wise? They are not like us. When we fight, we expect to win or lose. But when they fight..." His voice trailed off. Everyone knew the stories. Colonies that tried to conquer Earth centuries ago and vanished. Empires that tried to enslave Terrans and burned from within. Fleets that entered Terran space and never came back. The speaker forced a smile. "Old stories," he replied. "Nothing more. Humanity has become arrogant. This council is united. We will crush them before they can act." He struck the ceremonial hammer against the podium, the sound ringing through the chamber like a gunshot. "The vote has already been passed. This war is official. All fleets will mobilize within the cycle." Still, the silence didn't break. No victory chants. No celebration. Only quiet unease. The representatives of some species leaned in toward one another, whispering under their breath. A few delegates, those whose ancestors had fought humans before, clenched their hands against the table. One leaned back in his chair and whispered, "Fools!" High above the council chamber, a fleet command center was already alive with movement. Orders were being sent across star maps, battle plans drafted, supply routes drawn in glowing blue lines. Generals from dozens of species gathered around floating displays of Earth's star systems. They moved ships on the board like pieces in a game. To them, it all looked neat and easy. They had more ships, more numbers, more allies. The council believed this would be quick. But the few who had studied human wars in history knew better. The humans never made their real strength visible until the moment they struck back. On Earth, thousands of light years away, a cold wind cut across the top of an abandoned mountain. The world above was quiet. Birds flew. Rivers moved. Clouds rolled over a blue sky. But below that mountain, deep underground, something ancient stirred. Alarms, silent for decades, began to flash in long, dark corridors. Red lights pulsed against the concrete walls as hidden machines hummed to life. Terminals lit up with streams of data. In a dim command room buried beneath layers of rock and steel, men and women stood around a glowing table showing the stars. They weren't shocked. They weren't panicked. They were waiting. One of the older generals, a man with a scar across his face and calm eyes, exhaled slowly and set his hand down on the table. "So," he said quietly, "they finally did it." Another officer, young and sharp, gave a short nod. "Council broadcast confirmed. They've declared war." The general's lips curved slightly, not into a smile but something colder. "About time." He turned toward the large screen on the far wall, showing the spinning emblem of the council. Every news network in the galaxy was replaying the announcement. The speaker's trembling voice echoed through the bunker. "Declare war on humanity." But in this room, no one looked frightened. They looked focused, calm, like a storm that had been sitting at the edge of the sky, waiting for someone to make the mistake of calling it forward. Another general leaned against the railing, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the metal. "They think this is going to be easy," she said with quiet amusement. "They always do, until they see us fight." The old man nodded. "They're counting ships. They're counting numbers. But they don't know what they've really declared war on." Somewhere far beneath them, an ancient voice, the AI core of Earth's war network, came online for the first time in 40 years. Its deep mechanical tone filled the control room. "Terran Defense Protocol activated. Stand by for fleet command." The walls vibrated slightly as power surged into the underground stations. Massive blast doors began to slide open in hidden shipyards scattered across the solar system. Dust-covered starships that hadn't moved in decades came alive again. In orbit around Jupiter, a fleet of dark, silent ships released their clamps and began to drift out of the shadows. Their hulls bore no markings, no colors, no insignia. Just black steel. Human steel. Back in the council chamber, a young delegate who had never fought in a war raised his voice nervously. "Speaker, shouldn't we at least try to negotiate first? Their species is dangerous?" The speaker interrupted sharply. "That's why we strike now. If we hesitate, they will become unstoppable." He didn't notice the way the oldest delegate in the room, an insectoid with scars older than the speaker himself, closed his eyes and whispered under his breath, "They already are." At that exact moment, in the void beyond Neptune, long-range Terran listening stations picked up the first Council fleet broadcasts. Enemy ships were on the move. In response, Earth didn't send messages. It didn't panic. It didn't even announce mobilization. It simply began to prepare. Submarines hidden beneath the polar ice began to rise. Automated defense satellites woke from sleep, rotating into position with a low mechanical groan. In the asteroid belt, old mining stations opened like flowers, revealing missile silos buried beneath rock and dust. In Mars' orbit, a line of black carriers drifted into formation. Humanity had been ready for this war long before the Council had even imagined it. For decades, they'd listened to the whispers. They'd seen the growing unease of alien powers. They'd known this day would come. They just never bothered to warn anyone. Inside the bunker, a massive screen flickered to life, showing a star map of Council territory. Dozens of red markers lit up like fresh wounds. One of the officers gave a quiet laugh. "They're lining up their fleets like they're planning a parade." The general with the scar leaned forward and pressed a single button. Across the galaxy, in systems the Council had forgotten existed, silent fleets began to move. Dozens of Terran dreadnoughts slipped out of the black edges of space, their drives hidden, their guns already charged. On the moon, soldiers began to gather on the launch platforms. Not wide-eyed recruits, not volunteers, professionals. Every one of them had trained for a war no one wanted to speak about. Every one of them carried the same quiet expression. Cold focus. In a small observation station at the edge of Council space, an alien communications officer received a report and went pale. A Terran listening beacon had gone active, something that hadn't happened in centuries. He stared at the blinking red light on the screen and whispered, "Oh no!" By the time the Council celebrated their declaration with speeches and grand promises, humanity was already moving. Quiet. Invisible. The speaker finally left the podium, believing he had made history. He didn't know he had just written an obituary, for his fleets, for his pride, for everything the Council thought it controlled. On Earth, the general with the scar watched the last of the red alarms fade to steady lights. "They think they declared war on a planet," he said slowly. "They don't understand. They declared war on the only species that fights like it has nothing left to lose." He turned to his officers. "Activate the phantom fleets." And out in the void, something vast and silent began to wake up. A black shape, bigger than any council ship, slid out of a dead star's orbit. One by one, human warships answered the call. The galaxy thought they had started a war. Humanity had been waiting for it. Across the galaxy, the Council's declaration spread like fire through dry grass. On every major world, massive holoscreens replayed the trembling voice of the speaker as if it were a victory speech. Alien anchors were confident smiles, political commentators spoke of swift victories, and analysts drew neat maps on glowing tables, predicting that the war would last a month at most. They called it the Cleansing War, a symbolic strike to remind humanity of its place. On the surface, the galaxy seemed united in celebration. But in the quieter corners, dark stations, smugglers' bars, and forgotten battlefields, no one was celebrating. They were whispering, and those whispers carried weight heavier than any speech. On a mining station orbiting a dying star, a group of old freighter captains sat hunched over a table, the blue glow of a projector lighting their faces. One of them, a scarred reptilian with a voice like gravel, replayed the council broadcast again. "Idiots," he muttered. "They've no idea what they've just done." Another captain leaned in, lowering his voice even though no one else was around. "Do you remember Titan?" The reptilian nodded slowly. Everyone remembered Titan. Decades ago, before the council banned all talk of it, a pirate armada had attacked a Terran colony on Titan's icy plains. 200 ships vanished in a single night. No wreckage, no distress calls, just silence. And silence, when it came from Terrans, was worse than any scream. On the other side of the galaxy, deep in a desert system, a black market information broker passed a single message through encrypted channels. "The humans are awake." The message spread through shadow networks faster than the council could censor it. Old war veterans, smugglers, mercenaries, and exiles, all those who had once crossed paths with humans, felt the chill settle in their bones. The council might have fleets and numbers, but they were making a mistake that history had already warned them about. They were underestimating the one species that didn't play by galactic rules. At a distant military academy on Corvi Prime, a young cadet whispered nervously to his instructor after class. "Sir, is it true what they say? That no one survives fighting them?" The instructor, a veteran of the last border conflict with the Terrans, didn't answer immediately. He stared out the window at the marching lines of new recruits. "Do you know why no one tells stories about Terran wars?" he finally said, his voice low. "Because the ones who fought them didn't come back to tell those stories." Meanwhile, in council military command centers, the mood was far less grim. Admirals and fleet planners leaned over holographic star maps like chess players convinced they'd already won. Glowing icons represented human colonies, outposts, and fleet positions. On paper, the war was simple. The council controlled over 70% of the galaxy's major trade routes. Their fleets outnumbered humanity's by nearly 5 to 1. Their logistics networks stretched across hundreds of systems. And most of all, they believed humanity was cornered, isolated in its small pocket of space around Sol, too weak to resist. A tall, armored admiral from the Kryth Dominion slammed a clawed hand on the table and barked. "We strike hard. We strike fast. We burn Sol and everything around it before they can even raise their defenses." A chorus of voices echoed in agreement. "Yes. End it quickly. Crush them before they breathe." The arrogance in the room was thick enough to choke on. None of them had ever fought a human war. None of them understood what it meant when humans were pushed. On a far-off moon in neutral space, a small group of ex-council soldiers huddled in a dingy cantina. One of them, a grizzled old warrior with metal plates where his arm used to be, stared into his drink and spoke without looking up. "They're celebrating now," he said flatly. "They'll stop when the bodies start floating." Another leaned closer. "You think the humans are that dangerous?" The old warrior finally looked up, and his eyes were cold. Dangerous? They're worse. They don't just win. They erase. On the civilian worlds, rumors began to spread faster than official news could contain. People remembered old legends of Terran soldiers walking through fire, of their ships turning entire fleets to dust, of colonies that disappeared when they tried to take from humans what wasn't theirs. The Council tried to push out propaganda, showing their shining fleets and perfectly planned invasion routes. But every night, in private homes and crowded dormitories, the whispers grew louder. You don't declare war on humanity. You survive it if you're lucky. In one particularly old outpost, the whispers weren't just stories, they were memories. A small insectoid mechanic, one of the few survivors of a skirmish long buried in official records, sat with his granddaughter on a metal crate. They think they know what's coming, he rasped softly, the sound of the wind cutting through the hangar. But humans, they don't fight like anyone else. They fight like animals cornered. They fight until nothing is left standing. She stared at him wide-eyed. Then why would the Council start a war with them? The old mechanic let out a humorless laugh. Because the Council has forgotten what we remember. On Earth, humanity was silent. No speeches. No public threats. No declarations. That silence was what terrified the few aliens who understood them. Because the galaxy had seen humanity talk before, but only before small fights. When they were silent, it meant the real war was coming. Council analysts noticed something strange only days after the declaration. The Terran communication networks went dark. Not one fleet transmission. Not one diplomatic protest. No panic, no refugees. Their ships simply vanished from standard scanners. A fleet that should have been easy to find was gone, swallowed into black space like it never existed. One nervous strategist muttered to his colleague, "Why aren't they moving?" His colleague stared at the silent screen and whispered, "Because they already have." In the vast black void between stars, cloaked Terran stealth ships were already spreading like shadows. Automated listening posts that the Council didn't even know existed were blinking to life one by one, like eyes opening in the dark. Out in the Halo line, a place the Council never dared to approach, a ghost fleet was moving. Massive dreadnoughts, matte black and silent, glided through the cold emptiness like predators. They didn't broadcast identification codes. They didn't appear on civilian scanners. But the few who had seen them before remembered the name given in terrified whispers, the Phantom Fleet. On a Council carrier near the border, a young communications officer picked up a strange blip on long-range sensors. It was gone before he could lock onto it. "False reading," the captain said dismissively. "Terrans don't have stealth technology that advanced." The officer nodded, but his hands trembled. That night, the ship disappeared without sending a single distress call. Back in the Council chamber, the speaker sat alone in his private office, staring at the map of Terran space. He had done what no speaker before him had dared to do, declare open war on humanity. He told himself this was for order, for peace, for control. But in the quiet, away from the cameras, he could feel a cold pit in his stomach. He had seen those same stories in the archives. He knew what happened to those who fought humans. He whispered to himself, "This time will be different." But the doubt lingered in his eyes. In that same moment, deep beneath Earth, a single order echoed through human command bunkers. "Begin silent phase." Across Sol System, massive carrier groups slipped into the void. No speeches, no parades, just movement. The Council had spent the first week celebrating a war they thought they'd already won. But those who had seen Terrans fight before knew something the Council didn't. Humanity never rushed. Humanity never warned. Humanity simply arrived like a storm that no one could stop. And once they moved, there was no turning back. Out in the dark, a single dreadnought, the TNS Eclipse, entered stealth formation at the edge of Council space. Its captain stared at the glowing red dot marking the Council capital. His voice was low and steady as he gave the first command of the war. They wanted a war. Let's show them what it looks like. And so the whispers turned into a breathless silence across the stars. The storm was coming, and this time, there would be no second chances. The stars over Earth's orbit looked calm, cold and endless, but deep beneath that silence, something was awakening that the galaxy hadn't seen in centuries. In the underground bunkers hidden under old mountain ranges, beneath layers of steel and concrete, the command center of humanity's war machine came fully alive. Red lights painted the halls in an eerie glow as steel doors hissed open. Soldiers in dark uniforms marched down long corridors with precision, faces set and voices low. This wasn't panic. This wasn't chaos. This was a machine turning on, one that had been waiting patiently for the day the galaxy made this mistake. The command chamber was a circular room buried miles beneath the Earth's surface. The walls were lined with towering screens, maps of the galaxy glowing in soft blue light. In the center stood the old general, the one with the deep scar that cut across his cheek like a line drawn by war itself. He placed both hands on the table and looked at the blinking red icons spreading like infection across council space. Each one represented an enemy fleet mobilizing. Each one was a reminder that the council thought humanity would be surprised, that Earth would panic and scramble its forces. But what the council didn't understand was that humans didn't prepare for war when it started. They prepared for it long before it ever arrived. A younger officer rushed forward, holding a data slate, his face lit by the glow of incoming transmissions. "Sir," he said sharply, "Council fleets are mobilizing faster than expected. 17 armadas confirmed. They're concentrating on the outer rim. Neptune's sector will be the first to face their strike." The general didn't look surprised. He had expected as much. His voice was low and steady, the kind of tone that came from someone who had seen wars break empires. "Good," he said. "Let them come. They still believe we'll fight this on their schedule." A quiet laugh rippled from one of the older commanders. "They still think this is a border war," she muttered, "like they're fighting some upstart colony." The general's eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something colder. "They'll learn," he said. "They all learn eventually." Above ground, civilian cities carried on without alarm. Children played, ships moved through ports, and no one outside the military complex heard a single siren. Humanity didn't broadcast fear. While the council shouted its victory speeches across the stars, Earth moved like a ghost. Deep beneath the ocean, ancient submarines carrying orbital launch platforms stirred from their cold slumber. In the asteroid belt, old mining platforms opened like metal flowers, revealing missile silos that hadn't seen daylight in 50 years. Farther out, near the edge of the solar system, something even more dangerous was waking up. The Phantom Fleet. Massive warships the size of cities began slipping out of their black hangars carved inside hollow asteroids. Their hulls were made of layered dark steel that absorbed light, making them vanish against the void. Each ship powered up with a low hum that sent vibrations through the vacuum. No transmissions, no signatures, no warnings. In the command chamber, one of the tech officers reported in a calm, crisp voice, "Phantom Fleet is online. Stealth systems stable. Power cores at full output." The general nodded slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Good," he said quietly. "It's time they remember who we are." On the moon, elite Terran shock troopers gathered in the launch bays, their armor matte black and their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. They didn't talk much. They didn't need speeches. Each of them had trained their entire lives for a war like this. Humanity didn't raise soldiers who hoped to survive. Humanity raised soldiers who planned to win. At the center of the lunar base, a young pilot stared at the massive shape of a dreadnought parked in dock. It loomed like a sleeping beast, silent but heavy with promise. The pilot's friend nudged his shoulder and whispered, "They have no idea what's coming, do they?" The pilot smiled faintly beneath his helmet. "No," he said softly. "They think they declared war on a planet. They don't understand they declared war on the only species that doesn't lose." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Council's fleet commands were lighting up like fireworks. Thousands of ships began aligning into neat, predictable formations. Their admirals were already holding press conferences, promising swift victory. One admiral in particular, a towering Kryth commander, boasted before the media, "We will break through Sol's defense in a single strike." The Terrans won't even have time to scream. His words drew cheers from his soldiers and uneasy silence from those who knew the history books a little too well. Back on Earth, in a small, quiet room off the main chamber, the general stared at a map of Council territory. He traced his finger across their fleet positions. They were so predictable. Their commanders thought in lines and formations, in neat strategies that could be read like children's books. They'd never fought an enemy that didn't fight on their terms. "They'll think we're defending Sol," he said, turning to his staff. "But before their fleets even reach the edge of our system, their supply lines will already be ash." A tall woman in dark uniform stepped forward. "Do we engage openly?" she asked. The general shook his head slowly. "No. We strike where they don't look. We don't roar. We whisper. And when they finally realize what's happening," he leaned forward, eyes narrowing, "it'll already be too late." Across Sol, sleeper fleets that had been hidden in plain sight began to shift. Cargo ships that were never really cargo ships changed course. Civilian stations that were never truly civilian started transmitting encrypted battle signals. Hidden listening posts embedded in asteroid fields fed data into the Terran network, painting a perfect picture of every Council fleet movement. Humanity didn't just have ships, they had eyes and ears everywhere. In the void, the TNS Eclipse, the first ship of the Phantom Fleet, received its launch command. Its captain, a calm woman with iron-gray hair, stood on the bridge as her crew fell silent. Outside the viewport, stars shimmered like distant candles. "Set course for the outer rim," she said. Her first officer hesitated. "No direct engagement orders yet?" She shook her head. "Not yet. Let them march closer. We'll cut their throat before they even see the knife." The massive ship moved, its engines silent, its presence invisible. One by one, more dreadnoughts followed it, slipping through the black like shadows. Back in the command center, the general watched as blinking green dots, his ships, spread out across the map like a swarm. Council admirals might be celebrating now, but by the time their fleets reached the edge of Sol, they wouldn't be fighting a defending enemy. They would be surrounded. They just didn't know it yet. The Council didn't understand the difference between fighting for control and fighting for survival. Humanity had learned that difference long ago. Humanity didn't fight clean wars. They didn't fight with rules and ceremony. They fought to end wars. Inside the bunker, the general gave the order that would set everything into motion. Silent phase. Complete. Begin ghost operation. Across the galaxy, Council patrol ships began to vanish. A lone cruiser near the Yaren cluster disappeared mid-transmission. A supply convoy burned quietly in the void without a distress call. Outposts on the edge of Council space went dark one after another. The Council tried to explain it as sensor errors, accidents, sabotage. But deep down, a creeping fear was beginning to grow among their lower ranks. A fear they didn't dare speak aloud. Because everyone knew the stories. When the humans went quiet, it wasn't because they were weak. It was because the storm had already started, and by the time anyone realized, it was too late to run. The general stared at the map one last time before turning to his officers. "They declared war on us," he said. "They'll wish they hadn't." And far away, in the dark between the stars, the Terran fleets advanced without a single sound at the far edge of Council space. The void was silent and black. Fleets moved like lines of light across the star maps, every admiral confident they were marching toward an easy victory. Council broadcasters called it a show of strength, proudly displaying their gleaming ships in tight formation, engines burning bright. But what no one noticed, not the soldiers, not the admirals, not even the speaker, was the darkness between those shining lines. That was where the humans were waiting, not on the front line. Not at Sol. In the black. In the places no one dared to look. The Phantom Fleet moved without a whisper. No signals, no lights, no transmissions. The flagship, TNS Eclipse, drifted through the void like a predator stalking prey in the deep. Inside, the bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's systems. Captain Elena Hayes stood at the center, hands behind her back, eyes fixed on the holographic projection in front of her. Dozens of red dots represented the Council's massive invasion fleet, all of them moving in a single, predictable corridor toward the Sol system. A faint smile touched her lips, not of joy, but of something colder. "They're marching in a straight line," she said softly. "Good." Her first officer leaned over the rail, watching the blinking red dots. "Arrogant," he muttered. "They think numbers will protect them." She turned her head slightly. "Numbers don't protect you from what you can't see." Across the Phantom Fleet, crews sat in silence at their stations. No battle cries, no roaring engines. These weren't new recruits. These were soldiers who had trained their entire lives for a war like this. The human fleet was a storm hidden inside the dark. Council scanners swept the stars, but they found nothing, because humanity had learned a long time ago that the greatest weapon in war was patience. Meanwhile, inside the Council's lead dreadnought, the atmosphere was the exact opposite. Loud, confident, cocky. Admiral Krell of the Kryth Dominion paced the bridge with a grin spread across his reptilian face. 2 weeks, he boomed to his officers. 2 weeks and this war will be over. The Terrans will beg to join the Council under our rule. His subordinates cheered, pounding their fists on the consoles. He turned to his communication officer. "Transmit another victory update to the Council. Let the galaxy see how fast we crush them." The officer nodded and sent the signal, but somewhere far away, that transmission brushed against a thin, invisible web, an old Terran listening net, buried in the black. Within seconds, the message reached the Eclipse. Elena's crew decrypted it effortlessly. "They're broadcasting their positions again," one of the tech officers said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "They're practically giving us a map." Elena gave a quiet nod. "They've grown soft. They've never fought something that doesn't play by their rules." She leaned closer to the tactical display and pointed to the tail end of the enemy formation. "Start there. They won't even know what hit them." Far ahead, in the empty stretch of space between star systems, 3 Council scout ships flew ahead of the main fleet. Their job was simple. Scan for ambushes, check for minefields, and report back. But their reports suddenly went silent. One ship vanished from sensors, then another, then the third. No explosions, no warnings, no distress signals. They were simply gone. In the Council fleet, panic flickered for the first time. Admiral Krell barked, "Find those scouts." His officers scrambled, scanning the sector, but there was nothing to find. Just silence. A silence so thick it pressed against their chests. In that silence, the Eclipse moved. No thrusters, just a soft glide through the void. It appeared behind the last line of Council carriers like a ghost. On the bridge, Elena gave a single order. "Fire!" The first shot was a railgun round traveling at a fraction of light speed. No one saw it. No one heard it. But the back end of the Council fleet exploded into chaos. A carrier disintegrated instantly, cut clean in half, the shockwave ripping through the ships around it. Before the alarms could even sound, a second shot followed. Another carrier vanished, then a third. On the Council flagship, Krell shouted, "We're under attack! Where are they?" But there was no enemy on their scanners. No flashes of engines. Just their ships being torn apart one by one like invisible hands were picking them off in the dark. Inside the Phantom Fleet, no one spoke louder than a whisper. Gun crews worked with perfect precision, loading and firing, loading and firing. Railguns boomed silently through space, each shot finding its mark like a sniper in the shadows. For every Council shot fired blindly into the void, 3 more of their ships vanished. "Rear guard is collapsing," a Council officer screamed. "We can't even see them." Krell slammed his fist on the console. How are they doing this? But no one had an answer. The last war had been centuries ago. The Council had forgotten what humans could do when pushed. On the Eclipse, Elena stood calm as the tactical display lit up with flashes of red disappearing. "They're scattering," her first officer said. "Good," she answered. "Scared soldiers make mistakes. And we don't." Across the battlefield, invisible Terran ships emerged for just a second at a time, long enough to fire their railguns before vanishing again. Council frigates spun around, firing wildly into empty space, hitting nothing. Panic turned their neat, straight formation into a chaotic storm. A council captain screamed over the comms, "We need reinforcements. There's something in the dark." The transmission cut off mid-sentence as a railgun round ripped through his ship. In the war room back on Earth, the old general watched the live data feed with a stone-cold expression. "How long?" he asked. A communications officer responded, "Rear fleet already down by 20%, sir. They haven't even reached engagement range." The general leaned back slowly. "Good. Keep pressure low. Let them bleed while they march forward." Back in the council fleet, Krell's pride was crumbling fast. His ships were supposed to crush Earth. Instead, they were being shredded before the war had even properly started. "Find them," he roared. "I want visual." His sensor officer shook his head frantically. "They're invisible. There's nothing." Another explosion ripped through the formation. Flames bloomed across the dark like flowers of fire, beautiful and terrifying. Krell's breathing grew ragged. His arrogance was slipping, replaced by something he hadn't felt in decades: fear. On the eclipse, Elena watched the chaos like a hunter watching prey run in circles. Her voice was calm when she spoke. "Pull back after the next volley. Leave the survivors. Let them run home and tell the story." Her railguns fired one last time. 3 more ships fell. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, the Phantom fleet vanished into the black again. When the Council finally stabilized what was left of their formation, 20% of their ships were gone. No enemy wreckage. No trace of where the attack came from. Just silence. Terrifying, perfect silence. Back in the Council chamber, reports began to pour in. Officers stumbled over their words, stammering about invisible fleets and impossible shots. The speaker tried to keep his voice steady as he addressed his advisors. "Probably pirates," one of them suggested weakly. Another shook his head. "Pirates don't fly phantom ships." The speaker's hands clenched. He knew exactly what the reports meant. Humanity wasn't hiding in Seoul. Humanity was already hunting. On Earth, the general stood in front of a giant map of the galaxy, red dots slowly blinking into nothing. "This," he said softly, "is just the beginning. They haven't even seen us fight yet." And in the cold, endless black, the Terran fleet disappeared once more, leaving nothing but the echo of fear behind. The war had started, and already the Council was bleeding. The Council's invasion fleet was supposed to arrive at the Sol system as an unstoppable wall of firepower, but now it crawled forward like a wounded animal. What had begun as a perfect, proud formation of warships was now scattered and limping, trails of broken metal floating in the void where ships once were. The attack had left the Council admirals confused, panicked, and deeply afraid. They had no clear enemy on their sensors. No transmissions from the Terrans. No surrender, no warnings. Just death arriving from the shadows. Yet they pushed forward because to turn back now would mean admitting the war was already lost. On the flagship, Admiral Krell stood at the command deck, staring at the tactical display with burning eyes. The neat red lines representing their fleet had turned into a chaotic mess. "Titan formation," he barked. "We stay together. We overwhelm whatever these ghosts are with firepower." But even as his voice thundered, it didn't sound like the voice of the predator it once was. It sounded like prey trying to convince itself it was still in control. His officers were pale, their hands trembling at the consoles. The silence from the Terrans was like a noose tightening around their throats. "Admiral," one of his officers said in a low, shaking voice, "rear guard reports more disappearances. 3 more ships. No debris. No distress calls. No survivors." Krell's claws dug into the edge of the tactical table. "Find them," he hissed. "I want their location. I want their faces on my screen. I want something to shoot." But they had nothing. They were fighting an enemy they couldn't see. Far away, in the cold black of space, the Phantom fleet was already moving to the next stage. Captain Elena Hayes stood on the bridge of the TNS Eclipse, calm and composed as her ship glided silently into position. Around her, dozens of other Terran dreadnoughts fanned out in a perfect crescent formation, hidden by layers of stealth technology. They moved like predators circling a bleeding target. "They're desperate now," her first officer said quietly. Elena nodded slowly. "Good. Desperate enemies make mistakes. And we don't need to wipe them all out. We just need to break them so the rest of the galaxy understands." On the far edge of the system, Council ships started sending long-range probe drones ahead. Small, fast, and armed with scanners designed to detect cloaked ships. But the drones never reported back. Each one entered the black and vanished like snow melting into water. One by one, their signals blinked out, and the silence grew louder. Back on the flagship, Krell's heart pounded in his chest. He slammed his hand on the console. "They're just ships," he growled. "I refuse to believe humans have this kind of power." But deep down, a part of him knew the truth. He'd seen the fleet strength reports. He'd read the classified archives about the old wars, the ones the Council pretended didn't happen. Those archives spoke of Terran tactics, of invisible strikes, of fleets that melted out of the black like phantoms and left nothing behind. He'd chosen to believe those were myths. Now he was realizing they weren't. Meanwhile, on the other side of the void, the Phantom Fleet finished its preparations. Terran officers moved with machine precision. Railguns were loaded. Launch tubes were armed. Fleet-wide silence was maintained. No music. No noise. Just the low hum of power flowing through steel giants. Elena gave a single nod. "Fire teams. Begin Strike 2. What happened next would later be described in Council records as the Black Storm. To the Council ships, it was sudden. To the Terrans, it was perfectly timed. Out of nowhere, hundreds of invisible kinetic rounds tore through space like invisible arrows. The first line of the Council fleet erupted in a storm of fire and steel. Cruisers were ripped open like thin paper. Frigates exploded into burning clouds. No alarms gave them time to react. By the time their sensors registered the attack, the damage was already done. Inside the flagship, Krell gripped the console so hard his claws cracked the surface. "Return fire," he roared. His gunners unleashed wave after wave of plasma and energy bolts into the black void, lighting up the battlefield like a storm of fire. But they hit nothing. There was no enemy ship to target. Just darkness. Just the void. Just the quiet hum of Terran guns firing from places they couldn't see. "Shields failing on the second wing," shouted one officer. "Carrier Group Omega destroyed," screamed another. Every second, another ship went dark. Krell's mind raced. The enemy wasn't just attacking. They were controlling the battle like a puppeteer pulling strings. The fleet that had been meant to terrify humanity was now being dismantled piece by piece. Back on the Eclipse, Elena watched the chaos unfold without a word. On her tactical screen, the Council fleet looked like a flock of birds being torn apart by a storm they couldn't see. Her gunners didn't yell. Her crew didn't panic. They moved like clockwork. "Focus fire on the carriers," she ordered softly. "Take away their fighters. Leave the battleships blind." In seconds, 5 more Council carriers were destroyed. Their fighters never even launched. The fleet's eyes were being gouged out before the real fight began. Council destroyers broke formation, trying to flee into the black. But that was exactly what the Terrans wanted. One by one, fleeing ships were picked off like prey running into the open. Far behind the battle, Council communications were in chaos. Distress calls overlapped, ships begged for reinforcements, and scattered commanders issued conflicting orders. What had once been a proud invasion fleet was now a panicked, bleeding mess. Krell slammed his fist against the wall. "We need to pull back," one of his commanders whispered. His voice was shaking. "We can't fight what we can't even see." Krell turned on him, rage covering his fear. "If we turn back now, the Council will brand us cowards." The commander looked at him with hollow eyes. "We're already dying." Then it happened. A massive shadow appeared at the edge of their scanners. Not a fleet. A single ship. The TNS Eclipse decloaked for a heartbeat, just long enough for its dark shape to cast itself across the Council flagship's view. It was enormous, far larger than any Council battleship, its black hull swallowing the light. The crew froze. Even Krell's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just a warship. It was a monster, and just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished again. A heartbeat later, 3 Council battleships exploded at once, cut down by railgun fire that came faster than their systems could process. Krell's rage turned into cold dread. "This isn't a war," he whispered. "This is a hunt." On Earth, in the bunker command, the old general stood with his hands behind his back, watching the live feed with no joy, no pride, just the cold patience of someone who had been expecting this outcome. "How long?" he asked. 40% of their fleet is gone," an officer answered. "They're breaking." The general nodded once. "Good. Let them run. The Council needs to remember this fear. They need to carry it home." Back in the void, Elena gave the final order of the strike. "All ships, disengage. Leave the message." One by one, the Terran ships vanished into the black again. When the Council fleet tried to regroup, all they found was wreckage and silence. In the days that followed, survivors would speak in hushed tones about what they saw. They wouldn't describe a battle. They would describe a storm that came from nowhere, a shadow that killed their fleets and then disappeared. Some called it a massacre. Others called it justice. But every single one of them agreed on one thing. Humanity hadn't defended. Humanity had hunted. And they were only getting started. Across the galaxy, panic began to spread like wildfire. The Council's most powerful fleet had marched toward Sol with banners raised and arrogance blazing like a sun. But what returned was silence. Transmission after transmission went dark. Entire formations that should have been lighting up the star maps were simply gone, erased as if they had never existed. The first whispers began on border stations. They spoke of ships that vanished in seconds, of dreadnoughts cut in half by a single invisible shot, of a single massive Terran warship that moved like a ghost. The Council tried to silence those whispers, but fear moves faster than propaganda. Within 2 days, fear was everywhere. In the great chamber of the Galactic Council, the speaker stood before the delegates, his hands gripping the edge of the podium so tightly that the gold inlay bent under the pressure. "The Terrans have launched cowardly ambushes," he barked into the comm systems that linked star systems together. "But we are united. We will crush them with our combined strength." The words echoed through the chamber, but they felt hollow. The delegates weren't nodding. They were whispering to one another, faces pale, eyes wide. Reports kept coming in, unverified, fragmented but terrifying. A representative from the Voran Empire stood abruptly, his carapace trembling. "We sent 3 fleets," he said sharply. "Not one of them has responded in 26 hours. Not a single distress call. Do you know what that means, Speaker? It means there were no survivors." A low murmur ran through the chamber. Another delegate slammed his hand on the table. "Our ships are disappearing before they even reach Terran space. They're not defending Sol, they're attacking us." The speaker raised his hands, but his voice lacked its earlier power. "Calm yourselves. This is temporary." But a roar of outrage cut him off. "Temporary?" shouted a tall warrior from the Kron Dominion. "You told us they were weak. You told us they couldn't fight back." Another voice joined. "You said this would be a month-long war. It's been days. Days. And already half our invasion force is gone." Across the galaxy, military officers stared at their own hollow maps in disbelief. Terran fleet signatures never appeared on standard scanners. Instead, entire sectors simply went silent. Trade convoys found burned wreckage drifting through space. Patrol ships picked up static where Council fleets used to be. For the first time in generations, the Council realized they weren't the hunters. They were the prey. On the border world of Nara's 4, the panic became real. A massive Council logistics hub was supposed to be the staging ground for their second invasion wave. Thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships, entire supply chains. Gone in the blink of an eye. No alarms. No calls for help. Surveillance drones recorded only a ripple of darkness moving across the station before every feed cut out. When a rescue fleet arrived 3 hours later, they found only silence and drifting debris. Every ship, every soldier, every crate, gone. Meanwhile, in the shadows of space, the Phantom Fleet glided silently. Inside the TNS Eclipse, Captain Elena Hayes stood with arms folded, watching the unfolding chaos with cold precision. "They're cracking," her first officer said quietly. She didn't smile. "Good," she replied. "Fear travels faster than our railguns. Let the fear do the work for us." Her communications officer turned. Intercepted council chatter. Multiple sectors requesting withdrawal. They're arguing among themselves. Elena nodded slowly. Exactly as planned. The Phantom Fleet didn't need to destroy every ship. They just needed to destroy the illusion of council power. And that illusion was crumbling faster than anyone had expected. Back in the council's command station, panic disguised as strategy meetings took over. Admirals yelled over one another, demanding reinforcements, demanding to know how invisible ships were tearing through their fleets. One young commander slammed a fist on the table. "We need to retreat and regroup. This isn't a war. This is slaughter." An older admiral shot back. "We can't retreat. If we do, every world in the council will know we're not invincible anymore. And if they know that, the Terrans won't be the only ones we're fighting." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. They all knew he was right. For centuries, the council had ruled through fear and strength. If that fear vanished, rebellions would erupt like wildfire across the galaxy. But continuing the war meant feeding more soldiers to an enemy they didn't understand. One admiral whispered what no one wanted to say out loud. "We made a mistake." On Earth, the old general stood in the war bunker with a calm that was almost unnatural. The star map glowed red with council fleet movements, or what was left of them. A young officer approached, excitement in his voice. "Sir, council forces are retreating from the Orion corridor. Their command structure is breaking." The general's gaze was steady as stone. "Don't chase them," he said. "Let them run. Fear does more damage than bullets." Humanity wasn't fighting to conquer. Humanity was teaching a lesson. Every Terran operation was precise, silent, surgical. They struck at supply lines, crippled communication hubs, erased fleets without trace, and then vanished before retaliation could even begin. The Council's war machine had never faced an enemy that didn't play their game. The Terrans had written their own rules. On a remote border station, a young alien soldier stared at the silent void beyond the viewport. His hands shook as he whispered to his captain, "They're out there. They're watching us." His captain barked at him to stay calm, but in his own eyes, the same fear flickered. No one could see the Terrans, but everyone felt them, like a shadow creeping closer with every breath. The speaker locked himself in his private chamber that night, staring at the report feeds. Fleet losses, supply chain collapses, border systems already falling into panic. His hands trembled. "This can't be happening," he whispered. They were supposed to be weak, but the truth burned through his lies. He hadn't declared war on a weak planet. He had declared war on a predator that had been sharpening its claws for decades. Across the galaxy, rebel factions watched and smiled. Old enemies of the Council began moving in the shadows. The Council's once untouchable image was cracking. One Council intelligence officer sent a single, terrified message to his superior. "The war is no longer about victory. It's about survival." On the TNS Eclipse, Elena stood on the bridge, the stars reflecting off her calm face. Her second-in-command asked softly, "When do we strike their core worlds?" She shook her head. "Not yet. Let them drown in their fear first. Let their own panic tear them apart. By the time we arrive at their doorstep, they'll already be broken." The Council had declared war on humanity, believing it would end quickly. But the real war had just begun, and it wasn't one fought with numbers or speeches. It was a war of fear, silence, and precision. Humanity didn't need to conquer. Humanity needed only to remind the galaxy why no one, in their right mind, ever declared war on them. The night sky over the Council's core worlds no longer felt safe. For centuries, those stars had represented control, power, and the illusion that their fleets could protect them from anything. But now those same stars looked like a canvas where an invisible predator could be hiding, waiting to strike. Panic had grown beyond whispers. Civilian transport ships stopped moving. Border systems declared a state of emergency. Trade routes that had been full of activity a week ago now sat empty and silent. Every sensor ping, every shadow, every flicker of light made people flinch. In the highest orbit of the Council capital, fleets of warships hovered in tight formation, their weapons armed and shields raised. It should have been a display of strength. Instead, it looked like a frightened animal curling up in a corner. Admirals barked orders through tense voices, trying to keep their crews calm, but no amount of shouting could hide the fear that had spread through the ranks. Soldiers whispered about what they had heard from the front. The fleets that never returned, the ships ripped apart by invisible guns, the stories of a single Terran warship that appeared like a shadow and cut entire formations in half. Inside the war room of the Council capital, the speaker paced back and forth, his hands shaking despite his attempt to look calm. A dozen admirals and high-ranking officials stood around the massive star map that displayed a galaxy full of red blinking icons, each one representing a fleet that had gone silent. "We must hold our core worlds," one admiral barked. "If we lose control here, the entire council will collapse." Another slammed his fist on the table. "Hold with what? Half our invasion fleet is gone. The rest are scattered and terrified. They're not fighting an army. They're being hunted by shadows." The speaker turned sharply. "Then we make them visible," he snapped. But even as the words left his mouth, they sounded hollow. How do you fight what you can't see? How do you fight an enemy that never answers your transmissions, never steps into the light, and never gives you a chance to shoot back? The Council had spent centuries building fleets to crush rebellions, to scare weak civilizations into submission. They had never prepared for an enemy that was smarter, faster, and utterly without mercy. And then the first signal came. A lone dreadnought stationed near the capital's outer defense perimeter picked up something faint. An energy spike that lasted less than 2 seconds. The crew froze. "What was that?" the captain asked. "It's nothing," the sensor officer stammered. But the captain could see it in their eyes. Everyone knew what it meant. The same kind of signal had been picked up before the Orion fleet vanished, before the border worlds burned. On the edge of the system, the TNS Eclipse and the rest of the Phantom fleet emerged from the void like predators slipping out of shadows. Their black hulls reflected nothing. Their drives made no sound. They didn't come in through hyperspace lanes. They came through the dark gaps where no one was watching. For years, the Council believed those dark routes were useless for large fleets. Humanity had built their entire war plan around them. Inside the Eclipse, Captain Elena Hayes stood at the front of the bridge, hands behind her back, her face lit by the faint glow of the battle map. Her officers watched the screen in silence as the Council capital system appeared ahead of them. A bright, crowded star, surrounded by fleets and stations. It was the heart of the Empire. She stared at it like a hunter stares at prey. "They think they're safe behind their walls," she said quietly. "But walls only work when your enemy plays fair." Her first officer stepped forward. "Phase 3. She gave a short nod. Phase 3. A few light years away, Council patrol fleets suddenly found their sensors blinded. Terran stealth satellites, hidden for months, activated all at once. Waves of static and false signals flooded the entire capital system, turning scanners into useless snow. On the flagship, Admiral Krelk screamed, "We're blind! I want full-spectrum sweeps now." But every sweep came back empty or jammed. The panic was spreading fast, and the Terrans hadn't even fired a shot yet. The Eclipse moved first. A single railgun round was fired from hundreds of thousands of kilometers away. It traveled through the black faster than light sensors could react. It hit the outer defense station, one of the largest in the system, and split it apart like a piece of glass under a hammer. The explosion lit up the night sky, and before the Council could even understand what happened, 2 more stations fell. "Where's the enemy?" Krelk roared as alarms screamed across every ship. But there was no enemy to be seen. The railguns fired again, this time at the dreadnought line. 3 massive ships that had taken centuries to build, were torn apart before they even turned their guns. The command center fell into chaos. Officers shouted over each other, Ships tried to realign their formations, but nothing was coordinated. The invisible storm had arrived. On the Eclipse, Elena's voice was calm, almost quiet. No wasted shots. Hit the command ships. Break their spine. Her gunners obeyed without a word. The human fleet didn't move like an army. It moved like a single living thing, every shot, every maneuver precise. Council destroyers began firing wildly into the darkness. Thousands of plasma bolts lit the void, but they hit nothing. Panic and fury turned their once proud fleet into a burning mess. "They're everywhere," one captain screamed. "I can't see them. I can't." The transmission cut off as his ship exploded into fire. In the council chamber, the speaker stood frozen, watching the battle unfold on a giant screen. His admirals were shouting, demanding orders, but he couldn't speak. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Humanity wasn't knocking on their door. Humanity was already inside the house. Back in the void, the Eclipse decloaked for just a heartbeat, letting the Council fleet see its full size. The massive Terran dreadnought, black as the void itself, blocked out the light of the capital star. Thousands of Council soldiers stared at it through their viewports and felt something most of them had never experienced before: pure primal fear. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it vanished again, and the real slaughter began. One by one, the Council's fleets fell. Their dreadnoughts were gutted, their stations ripped apart, their command centers silenced. Elena watched with a face like stone. There was no joy in it, no celebration. This wasn't revenge. This was a message. On Earth, in the command bunker, the old general stood before the glowing star map. Council fleets neutralized. Capital under siege. An officer reported. The general nodded slowly. Good. No invasion. No conquest. Just a reminder of who they challenged. In the council capital, evacuation alarms echoed through the city as the first orbital defense line crumbled. Admirals who once called humanity weak now begged for reinforcements. The speaker clutched the railing as another explosion bloomed in the night sky. "This can't be real," he whispered. But the truth was already here. The Terrans had reached their doorstep. They hadn't just survived. They had shattered the myth of council power in a single, precise, unstoppable strike. And everyone watching knew there was no coming back from this. The galaxy had changed forever. The sky above the council capital burned. It wasn't the kind of fire that came from riots or distant battles. It was cold, precise fire, a fire born from railguns tearing apart fleets like they were made of paper. The people of the core worlds gathered on rooftops, in towers, and behind sealed windows as streaks of light cut through the darkness, silent but terrifying. The once invincible council fleet was in pieces, their mighty defense line reduced to wreckage drifting like ash in orbit. No heroic counterattack, no glorious speeches, just a silent, methodical dismantling of everything they believed made them untouchable. Inside the speaker's emergency bunker, alarms wailed while officers shouted over one another, trying to coordinate what was left of their forces. The speaker stood at the center table, pale and shaking. His fine robes were wrinkled, his confident voice long gone. "How many ships remain?" he rasped. No one answered at first. Finally, a young officer forced himself to speak. "Not enough," he said quietly. "We've lost control of orbit. They're inside the system." The room fell silent except for the distant rumble of explosions above the city. It wasn't just a military defeat anymore. It was humiliation. For centuries, the Council had believed itself the supreme power in the galaxy, beyond challenge. And now a single human fleet had cut their defenses apart in less than a day. Far above, in the black void, the TNS Eclipse hung in orbit like a god of war. Its black hull swallowed the starlight, casting a massive shadow across the planet. Inside the bridge, Captain Elena Hayes stood in front of the viewport, her eyes calm, her posture straight. Around her, her crew worked with quiet efficiency. No one cheered. No one shouted. Humanity didn't celebrate war. They ended it. A sensor officer reported, "Council defense grid offline. Surface batteries are down. No counterfire detected." Elena nodded slowly. Good, she said softly. Bring the dreadnought line forward. Let them see us. Outside, dozens of Terran ships decloaked in perfect formation. Their dark hulls formed a wall that stretched across the stars, blocking out the light. On the Council's surface, people fell to their knees in fear. Their entire history, their entire sense of superiority, was collapsing before their eyes. For the first time in generations, they were the ones being surrounded. In the speaker's bunker, a frantic aide ran in, clutching a data pad. Sir, they've surrounded the planet, he gasped. They're not attacking. They're just watching us. The speaker's heart hammered in his chest. Why aren't they finishing it? He whispered. Why aren't they burning us to the ground? Up on the eclipse, Elena stood still, her hands clasped behind her back. Open the channel, she ordered. A moment later, her voice filled every broadcast frequency in the entire system. Not just military channels, civilian, planetary, emergency, even personal receivers. Every living soul on the capital world heard her voice, cold and steady. This is the Terran fleet, she began. You declared war on us. You sent fleets to burn our worlds, to break us. And now you stand beneath our shadow. We will not destroy you, not because we can't, but because we don't need to. Her voice echoed across cities, space stations, bunkers, and palaces. You built your empire on fear. Now it's time for you to feel it. The speaker fell back into his chair, his chest tightening. It wasn't just the words. It was the certainty in her tone. The humans weren't bluffing. They had already won. Elena continued. Every ship you sent against us is gone. Every fleet you trusted is dust. We have no interest in ruling your worlds. We are not conquerors. But understand this clearly, humanity does not kneel. If you strike at us again, there will be no warning, no speech, no mercy. You will not see us coming. You will only see the end. On the surface, millions of civilians stood frozen, staring at the sky. The line of Terran ships stretched across the stars like a black scar. The speaker's aides whispered frantically around him, but he couldn't speak. He knew, with bone-deep certainty, that if he said a single wrong word, their world would vanish in a single volley. In orbit, the Eclipse's railguns remained silent. The silence itself was the message. Humanity had no need to prove their strength further. The Council had already seen enough. In the Council war room, one of the oldest admirals, once a man who had laughed at human defiance, slowly lowered his head. We can't win, he whispered. They're not fighting like us. They're something else. The speaker's hands trembled as he leaned forward. Send the surrender message, he muttered. Back on the Eclipse, Elena listened as the signal came through. A simple message. No speeches. No conditions. Just a desperate, broken surrender. Her first officer turned to her. It's done, he said. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight of it settle in her chest. Then she spoke softly. Broadcast this to the galaxy. They wanted to show their power. Now let everyone see how easily it broke. A transmission went out, one that would echo across every star system. It wasn't filled with threats or explosions. It was just an image of the Council capital, surrounded by Terran ships, powerless. That image alone would change everything. On Earth, in the command bunker, the old general stood with his arms folded as the final reports came in. Council has surrendered, an officer said. The general nodded. Good. Withdraw the Phantom fleet. Let the silence finish what the railguns started. And so, as quietly as they had arrived, the Terran ships began to fade back into the void. No occupation, no banners, no speeches of glory, just the cold reminder that the most dangerous species in the galaxy didn't need to conquer to be feared. The Council capital lay in silence. The speaker stared at the darkened sky, his empire broken, his fleets gone, his arrogance shattered. He whispered to no one, "We shouldn't have provoked them." Far away, in the darkness between stars, Elena stood alone on the bridge of the Eclipse, her eyes fixed on the fading blue glow of the Council's world. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. Humanity didn't need to celebrate. The galaxy would remember this night without a single song. Because when humanity strikes, they don't come as conquerors. They come as a storm, and storms don't need to speak to be feared. They only need to leave silence behind.